Hey, you got barbecue and bottles here. Today we're gonna go through a step-by-step guide on how to barbecue and smoke a beef brisket, the mother of all cuts of meat for American barbecuing. Here we've got a 15-pound brisket, which is on the larger side of what you're gonna find. And these are real time commitments. So we'll go through timing, but it's extremely important just to keep in mind that this is something you've got to cook low and slow over a very extended period of time. So this isn't going to be like hamburgers or hot dogs that you can quickly whip up for your buddies. But first off, we're going to cover off what you actually need. First is a yellow mustard. This is going to act as the binding agent. Once we get the brisket all trimmed up, we're going to cover it with mustard, and that's going to allow our next ingredient, which is just a rub. You can choose whatever rub you want, but the mustard will let this rub bind to your brisket. Then we're gonna need some plastic wrap. So once you get your brisket mustarded up with rub covered all over, you're gonna need to wrap it and let it sit for 12 to 24 hours. And that plastic wrap is just gonna keep it all together, making sure the rub starts to absorb into your beef. Then you're gonna need a tinfoil tray, a spray bottle, and your pick of juice. Here we've got orange juice and pineapple juice as a mix. What we're gonna do is put that drip tray in the smoker. We're gonna fill it up with a bit of orange juice and then dilute it with water. You're gonna do the same thing with the spray bottle, and that's gonna really help to maintain moisture and add moisture to the meat as we go through the cook. And we'll go through the specific application of those, but make sure you've got those as ingredients, or rather just as things on hand for the cook. Lastly, you need a meat thermometer. And this is one of the most important items to make sure your brisket's done properly. Once we stick it on the barbecue, we're gonna stick this meat probe into the thickest part of your brisket, and that's gonna be the main determinant of when this bad boy's actually done, when it hits the desired temperature that we're looking for. So next, we're gonna talk about timing. Again, this is a real commitment. I would say there are 3 different stages of your brisket. The first is just the prep work, and we're actually gonna do that the night before. The prep should really only take you about a half an hour, and that's gonna be trimming up the brisket, getting your rub on. But once you've done that, you're gonna wanna let it sit for 12 to 24 hours. Then you go on to the cook. The cook generally takes between 60 to 90 minutes per pound. In this case, because we've got a 15-pound brisket, we'll probably trim off a pound worth of fat and get some moisture out of this bag here. But we'll likely be cooking this for somewhere between 12 to 14 hours. And then the last stage is going to be the resting period. And once you take your brisket off of the grill, you're gonna wanna let it rest for about an hour before carving into it. And that's really to let the moisture and the juices redistribute throughout the entire brisket, so that when you cut into it, you just don't lose a lot of those juices. Then the last thing I'm gonna talk about before we start trimming is temperature. And when you get your brisket onto the grill, again, you're gonna wanna use temperature as the main guide as to whether you've actually finished your brisket. And you're gonna want the thickest part of the brisket to read 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's when you know your brisket will be ready to come off. Around 160 to 170 Fahrenheit, you're gonna hit what's called the stall, and your temperature is just gonna sit there, and you're gonna be applying heat for what seems like an hour on end without seeing any notable change in the temperature of your brisket. You wanna just keep plowing through that. Don't worry, give it time. Your brisket with the right amount of heat will just continue to rise after it gets through that stall period. And one thing you can do, just given the time commitment on these briskets, is what's called the Texas crutch or the Texas cheat. If you want to wrap your brisket with tin foil or paper halfway through, or really at any point through your cook to accelerate the rate at which the temperature is rising, you can choose to do that. Personally, I try to avoid it where I can, but sometimes when you're cooking a 15-pound behemoth like this one, you need to do that in order to make a dinner time. So why don't we get into the trimming here shortly and show you how to do that. So we've taken the brisket out of the bag, drained all the blood out, and we've rinsed it off. I always think rinsing your meat before you prep it is a good thing, just to get all of that stuff off. Now what we're gonna do, the brisket's really made of two pieces, and this side of the brisket really showcases that well. You've got the point, which is this end, the thicker part of your brisket, and you've got the flat. And those 2 points are separated by a piece of muscle, and you can really see that all along the side of the meat here. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna trim up the brisket and it's really important to remember which part of the brisket's the point versus the flat. It's gonna impact how we carve the brisket up at the end. But generally the point is the fattier side. It's the side you don't have to worry about burning as much. The point is where we've got to keep that focus, so we'll make sure that we leave enough fat on the brisket at the flat side to protect it while it's in the smoker. So what we're going to do for trimming is we're going to be looking for any pieces of fat on the brisket that, as you feel them, are just really tough pieces of fat that almost feel like cartilage, where it's not a good type of fat. It's not actually going to render down as you barbecue it, and because it's not going to render down, it's not going to add any flavor to the brisket. So what we're going to want to do is just carve all of that fat off the brisket as a prep for the grill. You can just see as we're cutting into this, it's a really, really thick chunk of fat here. This type of fat is not going to render down during the barbecue process. So let's just keep at it. And you don't want to take off too much of the fat. I mean, it's for these pieces, you obviously want to remove them. None of your guests are going to thank you if they end up biting into a really tough piece of fat. But when it comes to, this type of fat here, you can trim it off. There's a bit of silver skin on the back of the brisket here. I'm not going to spend all the time to trim this down. If it was for a special occasion or a party, I might do that. We're having some friends over, but this isn't competition brisket preparation, so we're gonna cheat a little bit and just go with less of the trimming at the outset. Now when we flip over the brisket, this is the fat cap, and this is where we want to make sure as we're trimming, we're leaving at least a 1/4 inch of fat on the brisket. We don't want to be cutting all the way down into the beef. We want to be leaving again about a 1/4 inch, and that's really to protect the meat as it's on the smoker, on the grill. And this is the type of fat that will actually render down, and all of those juices are going to render into the beef and keep your brisket nice and moist over what's going to be a 10 to 14 hour cook for us. Now that we've got the brisket trimmed up, we're just going to put on our binding agent, which is, we're using simple yellow mustard here, so just make sure you get a thin coating of yellow mustard all along the sides, along the top, and along the fat cap. Again, on the sides, fat cap. And this is just going to act as a binding agent to make sure that the rub that we put on actually sticks to the brisket. We're not really looking to get much flavor out of the mustard. This is more just a practical rub application piece. Okay, now for the rub, we're just using our all-purpose rub, which is actually the base of it we got from a brisket rub that we've modified over the years. But sprinkle this on. You can be as generous or as stingy as you like. You know, there's different schools of thought on this. There's some people will be of the view that you just want to taste the meat. Other people really want their rub to shine through. You know, we're kind of middle of the road. You'll see we're putting on, you know, a decent amount, but still certainly leaving room for the taste of the meat to shine through. Now on the rub, if depending on where you are in the US, you'll get different approaches to the rubs that people take. Like in Central Texas or South Texas, they'll often be just a simple salt and pepper rub. This rub that we've got is a combination of salt, pepper, brown sugar, paprika, cumin, chili powder, and cayenne pepper. I think we even put a little bit of celery salt and onion powder in there as well. But once we've got this all rubbed up, like I think we do here, then we're gonna wrap it in cellophane, and all right, let's put a little bit of more rub on the top. And we're gonna wrap this all in cellophane and let it sit for 12 to 24 hours. And we're prepping the night before, so we've only got 12 hours to spare. But you know, if you're really premeditating this and you want to work on your barbecue game, you can go up to 24 hours in advance, just letting this sit, letting the rub really soak into the brisket. We laid our saran wrap out here on the countertop, and we're just gonna take the plastic wrap now and wrap our brisket that we rubbed and coated here. And this is just gonna make sure that everything gets nicely packed in there and the rub just gets absorbed a little bit into the meat as we're waiting over the course of the next 12 to 24 hours. So that is our brisket prep. And there you have a perfectly trimmed, rubbed, and wrapped brisket just ready for the smoker.